300 years to shake hands with those people.
Archaeologists plan to raise the ship and put it on display in a museum.
Who named the state of Louisiana. Archaeologists have found one skeleton on board. They believe there could be many more. Here's a look at some of their other findings.
We've recently uncovered the wooden hull of our ship. The ship is called the Belle. This ship was a ship that was used by the famous French explorer La Salle to come to the New World to establish a colony at the mouth of the Mississippi. He missed the Mississippi and ended up in Texas. After he'd been here for about a year and a half, this ship sunk.
La Salle came here to establish a colony and to raid Spanish silver mines in Mexico. Had he been successful, Texas might have a French flair rather than a Spanish flair.
There are a couple hundred shipwrecks in this area. We knew, of course, about La Salle ships. They're the oldest, the most important. The visibility in Matagorda Bay is really, really bad. Usually it's only a few inches. So in order to do the kind of really careful scientific archaeology that this site requires and deserves, the idea was to actually build a dam around the site, pump the water out so that we'd be able to work in the air. We found a cannon. I went down, took a look at the cannon, saw that it was, number one, made of bronze, number two, highly decorated, and that made it seriously old. 1600s, very early 1700s at the latest. That just had to be La Salle ship. There's nothing else on the Texas coast that dates that early.
What we can see here are the outlines of casks or barrels is what we like to think of them. And those barrels were just loaded with lead shot. And you can see them, the lead pellets right here spilling out. We know that these are the remains of a male. The rope has sort of fallen over on top of him. Makes me believe that he was dead prior to the accident occurring. You know, you can't help but have a lot of empathy for the people who would have traveled on such a small boat for more than 3,000 miles, the kind of suffering that they went through and the hardship that they faced. I mean, they had no backup.
Boy, those knots are beautiful.
The archaeology and the history feed back on each other, and each informs the other, and you learn so much more that way. It puts the flesh and bones on the dry historical accounts. It's like reaching back 300 years to shake hands with those people.
Archaeologists plan to raise the ship and display it in a museum.
Have discovered a human skeleton inside a 300-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Texas. The bones were in what's left of La Salle's flagship, the Belle. Channel 8's Bill Brown reports.
This priceless piece of history is slowly revealing itself to the 20th century. Now you can see the entire outline of the hull of the Belle, the flagship of the great French explorer La Salle, which went down 310 years ago here in Matagorda Bay. Earlier, divers with the Texas Historical Commission came upon an ornate cannon and other fascinating relics. Now this, the 3-century-old bones of a member of the expedition. He left his homeland of France in the 1680s, and he never made it back.
We know that these are the remains of a male. We're not quite sure of the age yet, and as we complete our excavations and later on when the analysis is completed, we should have a lot more information about the cause of death and the age of the individual.
Odds are he didn't die when the ship ran aground, but before then. When they could, the early explorers took the bodies of their crewmen back home to be buried. The bones were found in a storage locker in the bow of the Belle. In September, we watched as they uncovered the shiny bronze hilt of a sword. Here it is now. Other little treasures, a fancy belt buckle, a Jesuit ring, the kind often given to Indians when they were converted to Christianity, more musket balls, and a metal stamp. Dipped in wax, it was pressed onto paper to show the seal of the king. The wreck is a history hunter's dream.
So that everything that was buried, the ship wrecked, parts of it worked its way down into the sand, and parts of it became buried, and the mud cut off the oxygen, and that provided the outstanding organic preservation.
Other new finds, a heavy wooden carriage on which a cannon sat, yards and yards of well-preserved rope, and pulleys used to raise the sails. The crew is deep inside the ship now, racing to beat bad weather. as they peel the secrets away from one of the great finds of the century. Bill Brown, Channel 8 News.
Still ahead on News 8 at 6.
Laboratories, we've got a working laboratory now down near Galveston, and it's fascinating.
It's actually in Matagorda Bay. It's an exciting archaeological dig. Now, you remember last summer, archaeologists found a 300-year-old cannon from a shipwreck in Matagorda Bay. We showed it to you then. This morning, I'd like to show you how archaeologists have returned to that underwater shipwreck to recover other artifacts. And the amazing thing about it is that they're doing it on dry land.
For a shipwreck site, this is one of the most interesting ones to come along in decades in this hemisphere.
It's like putting a puzzle together, and it's a whole new adventure every day.
Excited archaeologists are busily trying to piece together the past at the bottom of Matagorda Bay. Here lies the wreck of the Belle, a ship belonging to French explorer Robert LaSalle. Fortunately, the ship sunk in muddy waters, so many artifacts, including the wood, are well preserved. Until now, this historic find lay buried beneath 12 feet of water. Moses had divine help to part the Red Sea, but it took architects $1 million to build this cofferdam, steel and sand, which separates Matagorda Bay from the bay floor and the wreck of the Belle. This is the first time this donut-shaped structure has been used to excavate a shipwreck. 2 rings of 60-foot steel beams were driven 42 feet into the bay floor. Between the rings, tons of sand. Inside the rings, thousands of gallons of water pumped out.
This is an impressive-looking site, and the technique for excavating this site is brand new, and again, it's a privilege to be working on this type of project.
On the day we visited, the team uncovered a sword handle, just the kind of artifact archaeologists hoped for after divers recovered this cannon last year. That find means the most to Bartow Arnold, who's been searching for LaSalle's ship for almost 20 years. He knows all about how it ended up in Matagorda Bay in 1686.
A norther came in. The best sailors had been killed by the Indians. They were weak, they were dehydrated, they were sick. They couldn't work the ship. The norther blew them all the way across the bay, and they wrecked in the shallow water by Matagorda Peninsula.
LaSalle got lost in his last attempt to find the mouth of the Mississippi. The French pioneers didn't have treasure on board, but mainly items like these to trade with Indians. Beads and baubles buried in the mud of the Matagorda.
We could find out what settlers needed to come to Texas, what they brought, and how they made everything. There's, like I said, it's just what do you want to learn?
Working 7 days a week, 9 hours a day, archaeologists hope to retrieve as much of the ship as possible until January.
Archaeology is a science where you kill your victim as you're going along. This is our study area right here, and if we don't record it in good detail, no one will ever be able to put it back together the way it was before. So yeah, we do take a...
Now, you can take a boat ride out to the excavation site, but you can't go down to where the archaeologists are working. To book a trip, call the Palacios Chamber of Commerce, 1-800-611-4567. You can expect to spend about $30 to $50 for that trip. Also, you can see the cannon, which has been cleaned up. There's a picture of it. The cannon will be at the Matagorda County Museum in Bay City until October 2nd. For more information, the number there is 409-245-7502. Coming up next week,
as it is rare, traveling back over the centuries by plunging hundreds of feet below the sea, where beneath the mud and muck, archaeologists have struck gold. Correspondent Bob McNamara discovered this story in the Gulf of Mexico.
Every day, this boat travels back in time.
For an archaeologist, this is a chance of a lifetime.
1 hour off the Texas coast, 300 years into American history. Here, as steel walls hold back the water, workers with the Texas State Historical Commission patiently and painstakingly uncover a ship swallowed centuries ago by sea and sand.
The last time anybody saw it was 300 years ago.
They are looking at what's left of a ship sailed by the French explorer LaSalle. This is a model of La Belle, which ran aground in 1686. The survivors struggled ashore, the mission a failure.
When they lost this ship, they were stranded in the wilderness. It would be like being stuck on Mars without a spaceship.
But the disaster has become an archaeologist's dream. Among the discoveries here, a one-of-a-kind cannon.
Every day is Christmas here, and every day there's something new, something different.
Here, too, a graphic reminder that history has a human face.
One person who made it this far who actually never made it off the ship.
Eventually, the skeleton may be sent back to France for burial.
For me, it's a little bit more personal, I guess.
Lead archaeologists now seem certain there will be no big discoveries of gold or silver aboard the old wreck. Still, it is little discoveries like this that make the dig all the more rewarding.
Look at the weave on this. Isn't it neat?
Here, ancient sailcloth, ropes and rigging, the details of life are being pulled into the present.
It's like shaking hands with someone 300 years ago. Sends a chill up and down my spine.
The centuries have not changed much about Matagorda Bay. It is still a haven for wildlife, and it is still home to a sailing ship lost in a new land, generations later, still carrying a cargo of hope. Bob McNamara, CBS News, off the coast of Texas.
And that's part of our world tonight. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Day with an extraordinary find off the coast of Texas, a French ship that went down more than 3 centuries ago. Here's NBC's Jim Cummins.
Here, along the Texas Gulf Coast, among the dolphins and millions of jellyfish, archaeologists have parted the sea with a cofferdam, made a dry hole in Matagorda Bay to recover a French exploration ship that has been stuck in the mud on the bottom for 310 years. It is a bonanza of historical treasure.
Oh, look at the leather. You can still see the grain from the leather. So it's in really just a remarkable condition, in fact.
Jim Burseth is the project director.
I think the mud here is what has preserved this wreck.
This wreck was La Belle, a 51-foot ship packed with 40 people and everything they owned.
Looks like this gentleman has a shoe. Mike, is that a shoe that you're...
Yes, it sure is, or a boot, Jim.
They had followed the French explorer La Salle in his failed attempt to establish a colony at the mouth of the Mississippi River in 1686. He missed the mark by 500 miles. The ship ran aground in a storm and sank after La Salle had gone ashore. And when archaeologists recovered one of the Belle's 800-pound cannons in 1995, they decided it was time to make this little archaeological dig at sea.
We've essentially parted the seas and are excavating in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, or at least a bay that flows into the Gulf of Mexico.
The ship itself is still sunk in the mud, but they are finding thousands of artifacts, pots and pans, guns and buckshot, bells and beads. Tedious work because everything that is recovered has to be preserved with salt water.
The drying out is the biggest enemy of these artifacts, and if they dry out, they'll actually begin to disintegrate.
Including the one skeleton they've found so far.
There's some speculation that possibly the individual had died of thirst, and the French were known to put bodies in the hold of the ship and take them back to France in order to be buried in consecrated ground.
For now, these people are thrilled about everything they find on this ship.
It's really neat when you find initials on some of this stuff. That's one of the really the neatest things about this job, when you can kind of get that in touch with history and the people that were on this ship.
I used to love going through my grandmother's attic. This beats that.
In January, the heavy work begins, when these nautical archaeologists disassemble this old exploration ship piece by piece. It will be reassembled on dry land. The only question is, where? Volunteers wash the artifacts.
We love ships.
And scientists at Texas A&M catalog the pieces.
Here's an example of wood in good shape.
The cannon and a few other pieces are part of a small traveling exhibition to help raise money for the project. But there's more, much more to be recovered from La Belle before the ship itself is brought ashore. And when they are finished, the archaeologists plan to tear down the cofferdam, leaving behind the sea and an empty gravesite for a ship that disappeared 310 years ago. For today, Jim Cummins, NBC News, Palacios, Texas.
In a moment...
A 300-year-old mystery ship gives up clues about its death. I'm Bud Gillette in Palacios. That story coming up.
Sometimes people celebrate great moments in history by dressing up in period costumes or recreating important battles. But one of the most important events in Texas past is being unearthed underwater each and every day in the Gulf. Bud Gillette says it is a phenomenal marriage of technology and archaeology. Bud.
Well, Clarice, before there was a Texas, before there was an Alamo, before even there was an American Revolution, there was an ill-fated French attempt to colonize what is now Texas. It was such a disaster, its leader was killed by his own men and evidence of their trip wiped off the face of the earth. Fortunately, that evidence was swept into Matagorda Bay, where it is sunken Texas treasure more valuable than gold. For 3 centuries, this man had only the silence of the sea for company. You are witnessing the last full day of his entombment in what was a watery grave below decks. His identity is not known, but he lay inside the oldest and now most famous French shipwreck in North America, the Belle.
We do know, based upon some preliminary analysis, that this was a male, it's European, that the individual may have suffered from arthritis.
Tony Carroll believes the man died before final disaster struck the Belle, that he was deliberately placed here in hopes the ship would return to France so he could be buried. That's what these folks now hope to do for him, and maybe even find out who he is in the process.
Several journals were kept, and I would think something as significant as a death on board, particularly prior to the wrecking event, would have been recorded.
That the remains were found at all is thanks to a remarkable piece of engineering called a coffer dam. What archaeologists did, and now work a little with me on the concept here, was dig a hole in the Gulf, if you will. But instead of troweling the water out, they pumped it out, all the way down to the ocean floor and beyond. Interlocking metal plates keep bay water at bay, barely. The roar of giant diesel-powered pumps is a constant reminder of the dig's fragile balancing act.
Basically, we're parting the seas here. We've got to have the strength in the walls to be able to withstand the force of the ocean trying to push the water back to cover the hole that we've created.
This is the first time ever archaeologists have created a coffer dam for a dry land dig below sea level. Here's an overall look of the Belle. The wooden sides of the ship are protected under damp burlap. The Belle is less than 51 feet long, 14 wide. She carried some 20 people and cargo. That's a wine cask next to our late friend. Look closely. Muskets. Researchers even found gunpowder, circa 1685. Topside, volunteers and staffers sift debris through ever smaller screens to discover delicate treasure.
There's a straight pin and some glass beads that he's finding, blue ones.
Irving's Carantier put her SMU education and job on hold for a young archaeologist's chance of a lifetime.
This is the history of America. As far as had the French made it ashore, it may be a different group of people in Texas.
Indeed, the Belle and 3 other ships sailed bravely to the New World under the banner of France and the explorer La Salle. He had already discovered the Great Lakes, the Upper Midwest, and Mississippi River, and claimed them for King Louis XIV. Now La Salle wanted to enforce those claims with colonists, but his first ship was lost to pirates in the Caribbean. The rest inadvertently landed at Matagorda Island, where a second ship sank in treacherous waters. A third went back to France to tell Louis the Belle and 120 people had arrived, but disease and hostile natives decimated the colonists' ranks. La Salle was exploring some nearby territory, and he left the Belle anchored here with an inexperienced crew. Late one winter evening, a storm blew in, a norther. It grabbed the ship and dragged it, anchor and all, across the bay. 15 miles later, it ran aground on what is now Matagorda Island.
The things that are exciting to me are the entire ship and the story of this ship and of these people and what happened to them.
It's that sense of history that motivates Sarah Keyes of Farmers Branch. She was there at the beginning, helping to find a bronze cannon in the murky bay water. That cannon, with King Louis' seal and initial, told divers the wreck had to be La Salle's ship. Keyes' formal education is now on hold while she works on something most archaeology students only dream about.
This is what I've always wanted to be when I grew up. When I was about 4 or 5 and figured out that I couldn't be a pirate, I wanted to preserve that. And I found out about archaeology. And that's a way that you can bring it back to life for other people.
That resurrection is already paying dividends. The cannon and some other artifacts are part of a traveling exhibit helping teach children and adults about this pivotal adventure. Beads, bells, pins, and decorative rings. They all tell the story of hoped-for trade with natives for fur and pelts. Pottery and tableware round out the human story of dreams and hopes that tragically died.
A whole different course of U.S. New World history would very likely have unfolded if this colony had been successful and if our ship had not been lost 310 years ago.
With his ships gone, LaSalle headed to the Midwest for help. Along the way, his own men shot him dead. Of LaSalle's 120 colonists, only a dozen survived. They eventually returned to France. The remains discovered in the wreck are now being carefully examined and preserved. This is indeed a European male in his 30s or 40s with poor teeth, even a broken nose. And he may soon have company. Researchers have found more human bones deep inside the Belle. Bud Gillette, Fox 4 News.
The shipwreck in Matagorda Bay.
And keeping the long holiday weekend fun for your kids. Are drinking by costumes or by recreating important battles.
But one of the most important events in Texas past is being unearthed underwater each and every day in the Gulf. Fox 4's Bud Gillette says it's a phenomenal marriage of technology and archaeology.
For 3 centuries, this man had only the silence of the sea for company. You are witnessing the last full day of his entombment in what was a watery grave below decks. His identity is not known, but he lay inside the oldest and now most famous French shipwreck in North America, the Belle.
We do know, based upon some preliminary analysis, that this was a male. It's European, that the individual may have suffered from arthritis.
Tony Carroll believes the man died before final disaster struck the Belle, that he was deliberately placed here in hopes the ship would return to France so he could be buried. That's what these folks now hope to do for him, and maybe even find out who he is in the process.
Several journals were kept, and I would think something as significant as a death on board, particularly prior to the wrecking event, would have been recorded.
That the remains were found at all is thanks to a remarkable piece of engineering called a coffer dam. What archaeologists did, and now work a little with me on the concept here, was dig a hole in the Gulf, if you will. But instead of troweling the water out, they pumped it out, all the way down to the ocean floor and beyond. Interlocking metal plates keep bay water at bay, barely. The roar of giant diesel-powered pumps is a constant reminder of the dig's fragile balancing act.
Basically, we're partying the seas here. We've got to have the strength in the walls to be able to withstand the force of the ocean trying to push the water back to cover the hole that we've created.
This is the first time ever archaeologists have created a coffer dam for a dry land dig below sea level. Here's an overall look of the Belle. The wooden sides of the ship are protected under damp burlap. The Belle is less than 51 feet long, 14 wide. She carried some 20 people and cargo. That's a wine cask next to our late friend. Look closely. Muskets. Researchers even found gunpowder, circa 1685. Topside, volunteers and staffers sift debris through ever smaller screens to discover delicate treasure.
There's a straight pin and some glass beads that he's finding, blue ones.
Irving's Karen Tier put her SMU education and job on hold for a young archaeologist's chance of a lifetime.
This is the history of America. As far as had the French made it ashore, it may be a different group of people in Texas.
Indeed, the Belle and 3 other ships sailed bravely to the New World under the banner of France and the explorer LaSalle. He had already discovered the Great Lakes, the upper Midwest, and Mississippi River, and claimed them for King Louis XIV. Now LaSalle wanted to enforce those claims with colonists, but his first ship was lost to pirates in the Caribbean. The rest inadvertently landed at Matagorda Island, where a second ship sank in treacherous waters. A third went back to France to tell Louis the Belle and 120 people had arrived, but disease and hostile natives decimated the colonists' ranks. LaSalle was exploring some nearby territory, and he left the Belle anchored here with an inexperienced crew. Late one winter evening, a storm blew in, a norther. It grabbed the ship and dragged it, anchor and all, across the bay. 15 miles later, it ran aground on what is now Matagorda Island.
The things that are exciting to me are the entire... And I found out about archaeology. And that's a way that you can bring it back to life for other people.
That resurrection is already paying dividends. The cannon and some other artifacts are part of a traveling exhibit helping teach children and adults about this pivotal adventure. Beads, bells, pins, and decorative rings. They all tell the story of hoped-for trade with natives for fur and pelts. Pottery and tableware round out the human story of dreams and hopes that tragically died.
A whole different course of U.S. and New World history would very likely have unfolded if this colony had been successful and if our ship had not been lost 310 years ago.
Bud Gillette, Fox 4 News.
With his ships gone, LaSalle headed to the Midwest for help. Along the way, his own men shot him dead. Of LaSalle's 120 colonists, only a dozen survived, and they returned to France. It's this fascinating true story that keeps people like Karen Tier and Sarah Keys going. They are two of the students participating in that dig down there, and they're here this morning to give us a little more insight into their work. Now, Sarah, I know you've been from the piece involved in the beginning, but you were kind of a Johnny-come-lately on this, Karen. Tell me about how you got involved in this dig.
I had actually heard about it on the news station here in Dallas, and since I do work in the archaeology department at Southern Methodist University, I asked who would I contact, and contacted, volunteered for a week, and then they offered me a job to come back and finish the project.
And you're with it for the duration. Now, Sarah, tell about, I know Bud was down there a couple of weeks ago, and by the way, they say this is the best story they've seen on the piece so far, but what have you found in the 2 weeks or so since Bud filmed that? Some more interesting things.
Oh, some pretty exciting things. Probably the best thing we've found so far is beneath the body. We've found a lot of personal possession type things that we think may have been his. The most exciting one is a porringer. It's sort of like a 17th century mess kit where you can drink out of it or eat soup out of it or whatever. But it has on it not only a really well-preserved touch mark of a Pierre or somebody Avaux, but also it has C. Bahange written on it. And we think that may be the name of our guy. And if that were true, that would be so exciting to know who he is.
I'm fascinated by this kind of thing, and I think it would be great. I know you guys describe it as not work at all.
Well, no.
How did you say that earlier, Karen?
You just go out and have fun all day and get paid for it. It's really not like you're working.
But it is tedious, is it not, Sarah? I mean, you have to be very careful and meticulous with every little bit of dirt you unturn?
Oh, certainly, but it's a privilege. You think, they let me touch this. It's 300 years old and it's history and I get to play with it. And so you're careful out of reverence.
Okay, this is something we hadn't talked about beforehand. Let me surprise you with a little bit. Texas has very strict rules about what you can take away from any kind of an offshore wreck. And some think that that has discouraged treasure hunters, certainly, because nobody's going to go out there. Okay, you say good.
Yes.
Okay, the argument is that nobody's looking for these things, that there are so many shipwrecks that could be unearthed, but because of the confiscation law, that they're not searching. But you think that's good, that they should be preserved only for archaeologists when they get time to do them?
Well, it's the question of context. Unless they're unearthed carefully by people who care about every little aspect of it, then it's just ripping it apart looking for gold, and you lose all of the story of these people and what happened to them.
Well, thanks, ladies, for being here. I know you're on break and about to head back to continue the dig, and thanks for joining us, Karen and Sarah, on this Saturday morning.
Thank you.
The Belle is the oldest French shipwreck ever discovered in this hemisphere. LaSalle was looking for the Mississippi River to claim for France when his ship ran aground in a Gulf storm.
This site has several what I consider to be miracles associated with it. One of which is that one member of the 300-man expedition eventually was one of 6 people who walked to Canada and sailed back to France and published this journal that gives us the wonderful detail of what we have. And another miracle is the fact that this ship still exists. Shrimpers have been dredging in the area for years and years, and somehow this ship remains in a remarkable state of preservation. We're really fortunate that it was almost incompetence on the part of the crew that lost the ship. The ship basically gently ran aground. Another storm came in and drove the hull of the ship down into the mud, and that portions of the hull of the ship that were driven in the mud are what we have preserved. The mud down here in the bed of Matagorda Bay has created an anaerobic environment that is oxygen-free environment that's conducive for the preservation of wood and artifacts. You seldom find that in shipwrecks. Most shipwrecks are really broken apart in the water and scattered
giving up many of its 300-year-old secrets to a team of Texas archaeologists. Assistant Project Director Tony Carroll takes us on a tour of the Belle, which sailed 4,000 miles here to its final resting place.
It was called the Bark Long, and it is a very small ship. As you can see by looking at it, it's not very long at all. It's only about a little over 50 feet long, a little over 15 feet wide. It only has one deck, only has 2 masts. So we're not talking a ship that is really large. And when you think about crossing oceans in something that small, it's really remarkable. How many men would have been on board the ship? A normal complement probably would have been between 30 and 40. However, they would have had a lot of other people on board as well because they were bringing people and supplies. So it would have been extremely crowded. It would have been extremely uncomfortable. It wouldn't have been a pleasant experience at all. This is the bow of the ship. As you can see here, it comes to a very pointed and abrupt end. These pieces here represent the stem post and the first timbers as you go back into the construction of the ship. These are large, heavy timbers, and almost all ships at this time period were constructed of oak. This is the actual outside hull planking on the ship. These are the frames of the ship, or the ribs. A lot of people think of it in those terms. And this bit of wood right here, this is the planking that's on the inside of the ship. And so it makes a very tight seal. It is sandwiched together, and so it makes a strong and sturdy ship. In the central area of the site, you can see some barrels, or what's left of barrels, and all of them are just spilling out shot. So we've collected literally thousands and thousands of pieces of shot. Another thing that they came here to do was trade, and they brought a lot of material with them to trade. And one of the classes of material that we've collected are these exquisite blue and black beads. They're very tiny. They're called seed beads. And so far, we have collected almost 25,000 beads, which represents a tremendous commitment to trade. This is where, remember we talked about the gun that was discovered last year. This in here, this shape, this cap, basically, is where the gun was lying, right in through here. This area that we're looking at here is the stern. And what happens is that the ship wrecked and rolled over to one side. All of the things that were above the deck level fell to this side that we're standing on. And what we're seeing right all in this area here is the result of that rolling of the ship. This is all part of the upper deck work. This is an area where the galley would have been and where a lot of personal possessions would have been stored on board a ship. Then right back here in the stern, which is a little bit of a surprising place to find it, are those lovely little pots, those ceramic pots. This little pot, and this little pot, and this little pot, because they all had lids, they contained a real sticky substance that we were kind of perplexed about until we realized it was probably pitch. And what we were seeing here was the handle and a lid that would have gone through, probably had a bit of brush on the inside, and they would have used that in caulking the ship and in any place they wanted to try and seal the wood. This is the master frame of the ship, and this, and that frame was in the first 3 frames that were assembled during the ship's construction. This triple frame indicates the widest part of the ship, and it's also a very significant piece of information in terms of the actual construction of the ship.
Some human bones have also been discovered in the hull of the ship. Archaeologists hope to finish the excavation by the end of the year. The Texas legislature allocated $1.7 million to the project. Artifacts have been sent to Texas A&M for restoration, and it will take years for some to be fully restored. The artifacts then will travel to museums around the state until restorations are complete and a permanent home is found. Finding the Belle and studying its artifacts will help us learn much more about early history. In fact, the loss of the Belle may actually have changed the course of Texas history.
This can tell us a great deal about LaSalle's plans to establish a new world colony. His colony failed, but if it had succeeded, Texas history would have gone entirely different. We would